All right, we are back with another edition of Through the Smoke, a Miami Hurricanes football and recruiting podcast here on the 24/7 Sports Network. Here with kind of more of our traditional style podcast rather than an instant reaction after a spring football practice. So that means we're both at home and recording this for YouTube as well. So if you haven't gone and checked us out on the Inside the U YouTube channel, go do that. Go subscribe as well. It helps. Those little things help us in a big way. Before we get into things here, Gabby, too, want to highlight a couple of our sponsors, of course. Go join Canes Connection. That's Miami's collective, of course. They do a great job of putting Miami in the game, of being able to play the talent acquisition game at a high level. It's vitally important to the success in this modern era of college football. And Miami's trying to take that step of becoming a program that can sustain success. And that means you have to reinvest into the program. And so, however, you can help, you can be a part of the grassroots of things there, canesconnection.com. They have many different membership tiers. Go support those guys in any way that you can. Also, want to highlight Nick Musarino of the Musarino Law Group. It's around spring break right now, Gabby, so that means there's a lot of people down in Florida right now driving crazy. And so, uh, if you've been injured in a car accident here recently, Nick's the guy I would go contact at 561 960 9870, or you can visit the musarinolowgroup.com for your needs. Again, been injured in a car accident, go hit up Nick Musarino at the Musarino Law Group. So, Gabby, I wanted this podcast to kind of be like a midway through the spring, you know, conversation, position by position, maybe what we've learned about this Hurricanes team here, because Miami wrapped up their seventh practice of spring on Tuesday. There was no media availability, mainly just because Pro Day was the day before. That was a busy day. Lot to unpack from Pro Day as well, with the guys going through there. And quite frankly, just a lot of media was there, national media with draft happening and stuff. So uh, took Tuesday off, I think, from a media availability standpoint. But Miami is now halfway through spring. 7 of 15 practices are in the books. And I think we've picked up bits and pieces at each position group about kind of where things stand. Maybe we've changed our minds on some things. Maybe we've learned some things. Maybe we feel better about where things are at certain position groups. And so I just kind of want to have a free flowing conversation about things. And so let's start at quarterback. And obviously Carson Beck is still recovering from his off-season surgery on his elbow. From what we can see, he's doing some very light tossing up in the air, lying down on the ground on his back. So there's obvious progress happening there.
Right.
Um, Still, May, June, I think, before anything serious happens with throwing, if everything progresses like it is expected to. So that's provided a big opportunity for the backups to kind of show what they got and, get those first and second team reps that maybe they wouldn't have been able to get if Carson Beck was a full go this spring. So it's an opportunity to learn about that group. What do you feel like we've kind of taken from that quarterback group here halfway through the spring so far?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting room to evaluate just because again, who everyone in the building expects to be the starter is not really participating in any of the football competitive things, right? So basically, we're evaluating Miami's pool of backup quarterbacks. A couple of those guys being really young in Judd Anderson and Luke Nickel. And and then Emory Williams is the guy who's been a part of the program now. This is his third year. So I think just what we've learned, I think from the quarterback room is that it's still kind of a work in progress behind Carson Beck. I think Emory Williams is definitely the furthest along to this point, which he should be as the oldest guy that's going through spring practice. I think there are definitely moments where Williams shows, some good quality backup quarterback type of
Yeah.
stuff. Again,
He can
do I
operate the offense, I think is fair
right,
to say.
exactly. Yeah, I think that's just like the fair sort of to me for me personally, I guess, let me like, just speaking for myself. For me, I think that's kind of like the benchmark for him is can he be like does Miami have a quality backup quarterback? And I think Emory Williams, I think to an extent, Miami feels comfortable with him being the number two quarterback
Yeah.
behind Carson Beck. I think again, perfect world. Carson Beck's on track. I don't think anyone's anticipating a situation where where Carson Beck won't be ready, and they're going to need to kind of lean on Emory Williams. So for Emory Williams being the number two guy, again, I think he understands his offense. This is his third year in the system. And again, I do think that there is some level of confidence in Emory Williams outside of what maybe the big picture perspective or outside perspective is from the sample size we got in the Iowa State game. I do think that some people feel like just in these practice settings, there are moments where he can kind of guide this offense and do some things with it. And then behind him, to me, it's just two young guys that are still very much figuring it out, right? When Miami took Judd Anderson, I think we knew that this was kind of a long-term project, a guy that is very long, very tall, and I think is still just kind of piecing it together from a quarterbacking standpoint, especially at the college level. And I think the same with Luke Nickel, a guy that came in, again, very coveted, back-to-back state champ, first team Max Prep All American, all of the good things. But I think that gap from high school to college is just so drastic. That's a huge,
Yeah.
huge jump, especially at the quarterback position as you are processing things. And look, I think they're putting in Luke Nickel in some relatively competitive situations as far as just kind of seeing what he can do as they kind of navigate, whether that be red zone offense or, doing some tempo things. And I think he's just still learning about the college game and what needs to be different and some of those next steps that he kind of needs to take. So it's very, very early on in his career. And I think that I think the fair benchmark for him, again, is just this is a guy that's going to need time to
Yeah.
bake. I don't want to, we can't put too much on Luke Nickel too soon or I don't want to crown him, maybe Miami's quarterback of again, I think there's just
I
still
think
it's still work in progress.
coming into spring, right, and I think this was a fair discussion to have. Like, can Luke Nickel legitimately push for the backup job this year?
Yeah,
Just from what we've seen, I don't think that's going to happen. I think he's going to take time, which is probably the fair expectation to have
yeah,
for most early enrollee freshmen.
yeah,
He is, um, the speed of the game is happening very fast from a processing standpoint, and I think that is leading to some accuracy issues as well. So
yeah,
it's just going to take time, right? Um, I think it's pretty clear as long as the recovery goes well, Carson Beck's your starter, Emory Williams is your backup, and that's a solid 1-2 punch, right?
right.
You want to have a competent backup, and I think they have that in Emory. Now, do you want him to be your full-time starter? Personally, I'm not comfortable with that. Um, but overall, I think you feel good about the 1-2 guys they have, and then they have developmental guys now. Look, this is hot takey. And honestly, like, this is probably unfair to Luke. Personally, just from what I see, I don't know if there is a future starter at Miami playing right now this spring. Again, that's probably unfair to
Yeah,
Luke because he's very young. You got to give him time to settle in at the college level. Um, that's just my snapshot take at this point in the spring. Could end up being woefully wrong a year from now as Luke Nichols settles in to the college level. Anything else to add to the quarterback spot?
no, no, nothing really from my end. I think that pretty much covers it.
All right, running back. Miami returns a nice, talented 1-2 punch, right? And Mark Fletcher, Jordan Lyle. Um, You got Gerard Pringle out there as an early enrollee freshman, and you have Chris Wheatley Humphrey out there as a redshirt freshman. Um, what do you feel like we've learned about this group? Because, in spring, frankly, running back's a physical position, and spring football's a lot of, thudding and practices in shorts and, shoulder pads. So it
Right.
can be hard to judge them, but you can see the improvements in body types and speed and vision. What do you feel like we've learned so far about the running back group?
Yeah, I feel really good about that 1-2 punch of Jordan Lyle and Mark Fletcher, or Mark Fletcher, Jordan Lyle, however it ends up turning out. But to me, I think what's probably one of my biggest takeaways from the running back room is just how Jordan Lyle has continued to improve his body. Like I think he's built kind of just like a I think
He's
he's
thicker.
he's built like right. He's gotten thicker. He's built like a running back one, but he has that power and then that unique speed, which we saw him, put on display at times as a true freshman. So I think he's got both, the power and the speed. Again, I think he's kind of a complete back. I wouldn't be surprised if again he ends up kind of emerging as if we're talking about carries and the separation or percentages. Like I wouldn't be surprised again if Jordan Lyle was Miami's top running back, and with Mark Fletcher being a strong number two. Again, I think that 1-2 is as good as it gets. I think both those guys are young. You kind of project to the future; both those guys will be back. I think that Miami's running back room is in really, really good shape with Jordan Lyle and Mark Fletcher, and then even behind those guys, I think people feel like Gerard Pringle is
He's
picking things up
quick.
quickly. Yeah, he's quick. He's a different style of guy. I think
Yeah.
Chris Wheatley Humphrey, truthfully, I think one of the most promising body transformations as far as just a guy from when he arrived to where he is now. Came in. What was he when he came? Maybe 170 something pounds.
Skinny. Yeah.
Right. The word is now he's over or floating around the 200-pound range. So he's a guy that's changed his body drastically. And I think at times he's shown some flashes too. So really, I think Miami's top four backs are guys that, in situations could potentially, handle carries at the Power Five level. So I really like the shape of this room right now, and I feel really good about just the way it's kind of being built out. And even as you look ahead to the future, I really like what Matt Merritt's done with it.
Yeah, I think you gotta. I agree with you. Like, I think Lyle could be, in terms of carries, leading the team in carries, but I personally think it'll be pretty close to 50-50 between Lyle and Fletcher. I think their carry number will be pretty close. Um, One thing we hear too, and look, we heard this last spring as well, but Elijah Lofton, the tight end, I think is
Yeah.
also getting some work, getting some carries, which I think is smart. I want to ask you though, Gabby, like, is this because, again, we saw this in the spring last year, didn't
Right.
really carry over into the season. Miami had three good running backs last year with Damian
Yeah.
Martinez as well. Would you would you make that a role for Elijah this year as well? Or would you rather add a portal running back, a veteran guy who is going to be the number three back maybe? Or would you give Lofton that opportunity? Maybe that wear and tear could happen then at running back for
Yeah.
Lofton. So that's part of the conversation. How do you feel about utilizing that into the season?
Yeah, I think it's something that Miami maybe keeps in their back pocket. But again, similar to the spring last year, and then what they went ahead and did in the spring transfer portal window by going out and getting Damian Martinez, and not saying Miami's going to go get a top, a top end running back like that in the portal. I don't think they need to, but I think it could also be kind of a sense that maybe they feel like there's just one more body they need in the room, and I think that could be kind of a tell that maybe they go get a veteran number three guy who can just kind of help balance out the room a little bit. And look, I think Elijah Lofton's talented enough to do things
He can
like
do
that.
it.
He can do it,
But
and
do
you,
you
you
want to
see it
bang
in
him
practice
up?
setting.
Like
Right,
it's a
exactly. And I
car
think
crash position, and they
yeah,
need
and
him
I
at
think
tight end.
right, and I think there's definitely been, and we'll get to it to the tight end when we get to the tight end stuff. But I think that room's thinned out a little bit too, just this spring. With some injury stuff that'll be maybe more long term. But yeah, I think it's just tougher to ask Elijah Lofton to kind of take a step back from the tight end position. Again, just from a blocking perspective, or just all the different things that he can do because he can block well. Again, he's not the biggest guy, but I think what he does on the line of scrimmage is impactful, and I think he can help Miami there too. So, I would be curious to see if in a game setting, if it actually happens. Like I think until it happens, and did we see it really? I think we saw him line up there. We saw different formations where he's almost like kind of lined up as a fullback.
Yeah.
Maybe some really
I
short
don't know if he
yardage
had a
carries, like
true
on the
carry outside of the
yeah.
fake. Was the fake punt a carry or
I'm not sure,
I
but I mean,
forget.
just like a true handoff. Like I don't even
Right.
know if he had did he have a rushing touchdown from like the one or anything like that? I can't really remember. But I don't know if in like just a typical maybe football situation if Elijah Lofton someone I envision getting true handoffs Again, maybe, but I just don't see it just with how important I think he's going to be to what Miami's doing in the passing game as well.
Wide receiver is a position group that everyone's curious about this spring, and rightfully so. I think, in a lot of ways, all eyes are on JoJo Trader.
Yeah.
Um, the second year, he's a sophomore now, highly touted recruit. Miami needs him to step up and be a playmaker. And then after him, CJ Daniels, who is the LSU transfer, he's out for the spring as he recovers from an off-season foot surgery. Um, but after, JoJo, it's more young guys, right? You got Naikar, who is flashing a little bit. You got true freshmen like Malachi Tony in the slot who flashes, Josh Moore on the outside who flashes as well. Ray Joseph is back for his third year in the slot as well. They need guys to step up and go take a job, right? Um, what are you hearing about this group?
Yeah, I just think this room is young, right? Like we're getting a lot, I mean, a lot of kind of young flavor, and this spring with again, I do agree. All eyes are on JoJo, and then the three freshmen wide receivers between Malachi Tony, Dalen Upshaw, Josh Moore, and again the other guys that you mentioned. I think that this is very much I think it's a pretty incomplete wide receiver room. Like I don't think it tells the full picture of I think what we're going to
Yeah,
end up seeing lined up this fall. Again, not having a guy like CJ Daniels out there, I think is I think it's that's a big piece that's missing. I think whatever Miami does in the spring transfer portal window, where I think we both expect them to be in the market for some if any big time wide receivers emerge, and there's someone that they're able to get that's been productive that can change a game. Like I think we would expect Miami to be in on that. But from a spring perspective, again, I think what's promising to me is these young receivers appear to be, future contributors. Again, the timelines I think are still to be determined, but I think there's definitely been flashes from Naikar. He's a guy that's in the slot that can make plays. Ray Joseph is a guy who's making plays this spring. Had a really nice diving catch on Saturday during that practice session. Josh Moore, the big freshman wide receiver. Miami's been, just really intent from the recruiting process, just needed to acquire that size. It's what they're looking for now in the 2026 recruiting cycle is finding that size, those big bodies, the 6'3s, 200+ pounders who can go up and make plays. I think Josh Moore has shown flashes of the ability to do that this spring. I think especially as they get into some competitive situations, I think Josh Moore has shown that he's someone. Again, what's the timeline on it? But I think that there's a lot of promise, just within that young group. Malachi Tony, a guy that again, kind of in shorts, he's going to be incredible in that setting. I'm curious to see what it looks like when the full pads come on, and it becomes more physical for him, and and things like that. I think the same for JoJo Trader, who I think has had an excellent spring. I
yeah.
think he's someone that's definitely going to be ready to contribute for Miami in 2025. Really excited about him. So again, I think the young, kind of core, I think is in a really, really good place. And I think to me, it's just some of those veteran pieces that, Miami's still missing. But I think there's plenty of reason to be excited about the young wide receiver group. But I think those guys still have a lot of work that they need to do when it comes to
Yeah.
actually getting on the field and producing and making plays. Like, I'm not sure like where they're at from that standpoint. I think it's going to happen
They're a
someday.
year
I just
away
don't
or two
know.
years
Right,
away.
right. I
So
think that there's still some time in development that still needs to kind of happen in that young wide receiver room.
they're getting opportunities because the room is incomplete and
Right.
injured with CJ Daniels. And they
Yeah.
look good. Like I think the future is bright there. Of those young guys, who excites you the most?
I think right now for me it's Josh Moore, just because I just don't think there's really anything like him on the roster. CJ Daniels kind of, maybe not quite as tall and maybe as thick, but I think Josh Moore.
Morris, yeah.
Right. Yeah, I think Moore is just bigger. So I think Moore is just something that Miami doesn't have. At the end of the day, Miami has a lot of 6 foot and under skill guys who are really athletic and can, maybe separate and make plays. But there's not a lot of the 6'2" plus, 200-pound plus that's showing that ability to kind of make plays on the outside or win contested catch balls. And I think Josh Moore already showing that he can kind of do those things in, again, sort of competitive settings, as competitive as it can be without full pads, I think to me is encouraging. And that's why I think Josh Moore, if any of these maybe freshman receivers, I think are going to be like maybe just ready to go. Again, I am encouraged about Malachi Tony. but I need to see it in full pads just because he's a slot, and I think it's one of those positions where I think he's skilled enough to do it. But I think Josh Moore is someone who on the outside can potentially contribute if he can continue to show that he can make those plays against the secondary that Miami invested a lot into, and they poured a lot of resources into it, and there's talent there. And if he's making plays already against some of those guys, again, I think that's encouraging of what he could do, over the course of an ACC schedule.
Let's say we're trying to project Miami's top four wide receivers for next season.
Yeah,
Um, and let's include potential transfers, right? So like
yeah,
we don't know who it is, but we expect Miami to get one or two transfers, pick a number between those, right?
yeah.
Of the guys playing right now this spring, who makes that four in your opinion? For me, it's only JoJo Trader.
Yeah, I think it's JoJo Trader, and then you might have to convince me about anyone else because got it again. CJ Daniels isn't competing, so he would fall into
Right.
that
So
group.
he would be number
And
two.
yeah, and I think
I think you
at
need two
least
portal guys.
I'm
That's
I'm
me.
with you. I'm with you on that. I'm with you on that. I'm curious to see how they go about it. To me, where I'm most curious about is if they go get a slot receiver, and that's where I'm
I
just
think
I
they
think
need to.
I think they need. I'm with you there. I think the outside wide receiver is a definite. I think they will go get an outside type of wide receiver. To me, it's just are they going to go get a slot? And I'm curious again. I think what they did in the winter window shows you that they will or would like to.
Right.
I'm
They
just
tried to.
wondering. Yeah, I'm just wondering what else becomes available, and things always come up,
Yeah.
right? Like I'm not saying that there won't be anyone, but they didn't get any of the guys that they tried to get in the winter window. So, but I think their actions show you that they are still looking for a slot now. After some spring, and depending on how people really truly feel about Malachi Tony, as far as maybe being an early contributor or Nye Carr. Again, I think it's gonna. I'm just interested to see if the tune has changed or if they're still going to kind of go that route. And
I
for
think
me
they're
personally,
still a year away, which is fine.
right?
Like I think
Yeah,
that's
yeah, I'm with
fine.
you. I'm
But
with you. And what I would, and that's what I would do. I would go to the portal and still try to find a slot that you can, proven
a
guy.
senior,
And I would go right, exactly, a one and done guy, and then another outside wide receiver to kind of complement this young group. And yeah, I think of the group that's currently here now, top four guys, JoJo's probably the only one that I would feel comfortable with.
right? And CJ Daniels, but he's injured. So
Right, exactly. And CJ Daniels, if he's injured.
all right, tight end. We already talked about Elijah Lofton.
Yeah,
He's doing well. Versatile weapon. I think he's really impressing this spring once again. One of the best, just like straight up football players, because like he's one of the rare guys on the team that you could legitimately play offense. You could throw him on defense. He'd be a good linebacker if he played there. And he's an excellent special teams contributor if you want to play him there because of his versatility. So a tremendous player. I don't know if you want to talk about him still, but there's a ton of new names too at
yeah.
tight end as well. What do you feel like Miami's got right now at tight end?
Yeah, Miami also brought in a Tulane transfer, Alex Bauman, and look, I think people really like him. I think he's been limited to an extent, so we haven't really gotten the full picture. But I think just internally, I think people are just really excited about the type of kid he is, his approach, and then just what he's going to give him on the football field. Right, he has 3 years of kind of tape that kind of tells us who he is. Right, we know that he's a red zone guy who's able to kind of find the end zone. I think he's going to give them plenty of inline stuff. So I think there's still plenty of excitement about Alex Bauman. I just don't think that we just haven't really seen it for ourselves yet because he hasn't
Yeah,
really
they
been a
do like
full
him a lot.
participant. Yeah, he's a good player, and I do think again, just the feedback I get on him is that he's going to help Miami a ton.
Same.
And then there's a young group of guys behind him. Lost one of them, Jackson Carver, and I don't think this is breaking news because he was at pro day and walking around like this, but he tore his ACL. He's going to be out for the season. So I think Miami loses sort of like an inline, blocker, a guy who could have helped them maybe on the line of scrimmage. So he's not someone that's going to be, I don't imagine that he's going to be ready for the fall if you're going based on kind of typical timelines. I think it's going to be hard to get Jackson Carver back. And then I think you kind of start dipping into some, really, really young players like Luca Gilbert, the true freshman, and Brock Schott, both those guys. And look, I think both those guys, like some of the other freshmen, probably a year away. from being like regular contributors or guys that are going to be ready to get on the field. Maybe that timeline gets a little bit expedited for one or maybe both of them to an extent because you're not going to have Jackson Carver. But again, I think Luca Gilbert is someone Miami's really excited about as someone who gives you some of that inline stuff. I think he's a better athlete. Or they believe he's a better athlete than people probably give him credit for. And then Brock Shaw is someone who is just kind of a really really athletic type of tight end who's in that 6'3", 6'4", 240 pound range, just like total beast of an athlete. So again, but I still think for both those guys there's just kind of work that needs to be done. And then you have Jack Nickel too, who came in as a transfer, who maybe helps fill, maybe more so than those other guys, maybe helps fill that Jackson Carver gap of just being just an inline line of scrimmage type of tight end who can kind of help you in those short yardage and red zone situations when you want to go to, and look, you want to go to 12, maybe 13 personnel that I think Miami would like to do if they're able to because they want to be really physical up front. Like I don't think that that's something that is off the table. Again, in some of those situations, and I think Jack Nickel is someone if he can prove that he can do it, it could be someone who can contribute on the line of scrimmage too.
Where do we draw the line on like who's actually going to play? Where do you put the line?
Yeah, I mean, for me,
Lofton and
um,
Bauman.
yeah, I think Lofton and Bauman, and then I think anything else behind that is very situational, right? Like I think at this point you could probably see some Jack Nickel, but again, I think it's going to be primarily as a blocker. Like I don't know how many passes we're going to see Jack Nickel, going out for if it's not in like extreme red zone situations or again really really short yardage stuff. I don't even know if I would expect like even like a Cam McCormick type of
Right.
speed where it's just like very situational. So I think he could just be essentially like another extension of the line of the offensive line if he's capable. And then again, I think it's just where the young guys come in. Uh, I think the rest of the spring will maybe tell us if these guys are going to kind of carve out roles for themselves, or if again, not saying that Miami needs to do this or wants to do this. I don't know this, but now I'm just curious if since you lost kind of an older guy in Jackson Carver, who again, I think has really reshaped his body. From my understanding, he was in like the 250, 255 pound range at 6'5". He's a big dude. Again, is just someone that Miami feels like can be, can contribute on the line of scrimmage in those short yardage situations if they go out and maybe look for a more pure inline type of guy. Again, I'm not sure if that happens, but I am curious to see if now in the spring if they look for someone that kind of fits that mold of just being kind of just like a guy that'll, put his head down and go block. So yeah, for me personally, where I would draw the line is Elijah Lofton and Alex Bauman as far as just being regular contributors on the offense. But I am curious to see how far it kind of trickles down because, before the situation, I probably would have added Jackson Carver into the mix as that situational short yardage type
Yeah.
of guy who, again, is not going to go catch passes. You're not going to ask him to run routes, but you can attach him to the line of scrimmage and you can ask him to go be really physical. And I think Miami was getting to the point where they were more comfortable with him doing that in a limited capacity. So it's going to be interesting to me to see where it goes from here.
The offensive line is pretty looking. It's stacked. We're in year 4 of the Mario Cristobal era, and that group kind of reflects the point of emphasis that they put on that position group. Um, they return 4 starters, right, from last year, and they also essentially add a starter in Ryan Rodriguez and James Brockermeyer, right? 2 starters. So their top 6 has, some experience, some age to it. I'm curious, Gabby, and we can discuss whatever you want to discuss with offensive line. I'd prefer to talk about them as a group.
Yeah,
Um, number one, I guess if we're going to talk individuals, let's talk James Brockermeyer and just how he's transitioning to Miami as the center. Number two, I am curious, like, where do you feel like Miami's top 8, top 9 is? Like, who would you list as like, you know, 6, 7, 8, 9 in that
yeah,
group? Because I think that is like always the goal with this regime is have good, honestly, they want a good 10. They want a good second team as well. And I think
yeah,
they're getting very close to that, at
yeah,
least from a body type perspective. They have a second team offensive line that looks the part. So
yeah.
Let's start with James Brockermeyer though. How's he transitioning to center from what you understand?
Yeah, I think it's going really well. Again, I think just what what we've been able to take away feedback that I've gotten is that he's a football guy, right? He comes from a deep football family. I think that that's going well. I think Miami's just very meticulous with how they approach, especially the center position. And I think James Brockermeyer is who they thought they were getting. Again, I think he's really intelligent. Just kind of understands it. And to everything that I've heard so far is Miami feels like, he's again, maybe he's not maybe Matt Lee, he's kind of somewhere in the middle of Matt Lee and Zach Carpenter, where they're just different style of guys, but maybe more stylistically kind of like Matt Lee. And I think they feel like he's a strong pass protector. I think, he's a good run blocker. And again, I think so far to this point in spring, Miami feels good about what they have in James Brockermeyer, which makes me just feel really good about the offensive line as a whole because I think we know what those other 4 or 5 guys, depending on how that left guard situation ultimately plays out. Regardless, I feel really good about this offensive line going into this 2025 season.
So let's say, I think it's fair to say like Matthew McCoy, Ryan Rodriguez
Yeah,
competing for that fifth, sixth spot, right? However it
yeah,
plays out. And look, maybe Miami rotates. We've seen them rotate guys that they
yeah,
feel like is too close to call. They're willing to rotate guys in. Um, so let's say like 7, 8, 9. Let's go to 9.
yeah,
Where do you feel like things are at with that group? Because you got a guy like Tommy Kinsler, who you look at him
yeah,
and you're like, wow, that looks like an NFL body type offensive lineman. Samson
yeah.
Okunlola, former 5-star recruit, who everyone's curious about. Um, and then other guys that Miami's brought in as well that might be flashing.
Yeah, to me, again, I think where I think getting to 8 is where you feel just like really, really good. I mean, as far as just like I think Miami has legitimately 8 Power 5 starters on the
Yeah,
offensive line. Can all 8 can't start here at Miami, but I think it's a really good problem to have between Ryan Rodriguez, who again I think looks great as far as just like the way his body's changed, even from the high school level. That was like the first cycle I covered, and seeing Ryan Rodriguez walking around now, like he looks like a totally different guy. Matthew McCoy, I think, is someone that again, we kind of saw what he is, and I still think there's just so much upside as a guy that I believe still has 2 more years of eligibility.
yeah,
Tommy Kinsler is someone that's just so massive, and I think he's someone that could potentially like if you really needed him to could play, and then Samson Okunlola is still kind of sticking with the process and grinding it out, which I think is a good sign too. So I think really those 8 are probably the ones that I feel best about and you start diving a little bit deeper into it. I think that there is some kind of positivity with a guy like Juan Manaya, someone who they recruited 2 years ago out of New Jersey. I think that he's someone that
he's
has been kind
big.
of up. Yeah, he's a big guy, and again, he's kind of changed up his body a ton too. Like I think he's someone that as if you project a year or two down the line, like I think he's someone that provides maybe quality depth again. Is he might be mine. Not, I don't know unless I'm like really missing somebody, David. That's just like I'm obviously missing. I think Juan Minaya might be my ninth guy. And again, Is he like potential starter level yet? Like I don't think so, but I think he can be down the line. I think that's someone that Miami's been pleasantly surprised with as far as just where his development's at. Just 2 years into, or I guess just really just one full year into his college tenure as he enters his second spring now. So that's probably
Yeah,
where I'm kind of at with it. I think a lot of those younger guys I think are still a sort of work in progress. Juan Minaya very much still work in progress, but he's
right.
someone that's kind of caught my eye as a second year guy who I think is just on the right track. Whether that be again a year from now or 2 years from now, like I think he's someone that maybe depending on how the rest of the recruiting stuff goes and who comes in behind him, but I think he's someone that maybe is someone that we could see play at some point in Miami. Like I think he has the ability to potentially get there. I don't know if he will or if we'll see it, but I think that's like if
He's
that's your
got the
ninth
body type.
guy, yeah, I think if that's your ninth guy, you feel pretty good about it.
One thing too, like again, I don't think he's like the ninth guy right now, but like just from a guy that catches your eye standpoint, Jaden Wilkerson
Yeah,
has a lot of physical traits that catch your attention. And again, I don't know what he
yeah,
is, if he's a tackle or a big guard
yeah,
um, but he's a guy that catches your attention as well.
yeah.
in general, this is a good conversation to have because
Right.
there was so many years, Gabby, where I would cover Miami and you wouldn't know who your, fourth, fifth, sixth linemen were,
Yeah.
because the position group was not in good shape like it is now. So they have definitely continued to build that group. And in recruiting, this is a big cycle for offensive line in
Yeah.
general. They're in the game for a lot of big time players. So they keep stacking it and stacking it. All right, on the defensive line, uh, look, I think one of the key things to watch or monitor this spring was how was Ruben Bain looking, right? Because last
Yeah.
year he injured his hamstring in the first game, second or third play of the game, and from that point on, his season was difficult because that hamstring injury is tough to play through, tough to recover from, takes time and rest. And so he had the opportunity to finally really rest in the offseason. And he's down 10 pounds. From everything I hear, he's looking like the player that
Yeah.
we expect Ruben Bain to be. And look, maybe we should have a conversation another time, but look, I understand the expectations on Ruben Bain were extremely high last year. He's still Miami's best defensive lineman, even if he didn't
Yeah.
meet those expectations due to injury. I think he's going to have a great year this year, assuming he stays healthy. Um, but that was something to watch. Um, Akeem Mesidor's back. So that's a nice veteran piece there. The development of Armando Blunt was huge. The development of all the second year defensive linemen was huge. Gabby, where I'm at right now with this defensive line group, I feel good about three, like, I'm talking about legitimate starters who can, like,
Mhm.
impact a game and play well at a high level. I feel good about three defensive ends and three defensive tackles right now. I feel
Yeah.
good at defensive end. I feel good about Ruben Bain, Akeem Mesidor, and Armando Blunt is taking that next step.
Yeah.
At defensive tackle, Ahmad Moten, David Blay, the Louisiana Tech transfer, and Justin Scott is taking that next step. And that's those six. That's a good starting point for your defensive line. You got to kind of fill in the rest. I don't know if they feel good about the guys behind them to fill in those rotational roles, or if they'd feel better about adding guys in the portal. But I think that six is a nice starting point for the defensive line.
I totally agree. Just that would be where I would. I mean, I think those six are very, very good. I think that's a very, very strong six that Miami has, and to your Ruben Bain point, like, yeah, again, it just the work. What I kind of keep getting back is just disruptive, like, or explosive. Ruben Bain looks very much like the Ruben Bain that we saw as a freshman, and again, he can't control that he got injured, and maybe that again maybe changes maybe a national perception of him. But Ruben Bain is still very much Ruben Bain. And again, I think to your point, David, as long as he stays healthy, I think we're going to get a fresh reminder of just how good of a football player Ruben Bain is. And the Akeem Mesidor is a veteran guy. I mean, those guys are super valuable along the defensive line with especially the young guys, the Blunts, David Blay, Ahmad Moten, Justin Scott, like again, I think that six is really really strong as far as just what Miami gets. Again, is this somewhere where you need to kind of you can maybe add something just to kind of just make yourself deeper? Like I'm me personally, like, I'm always an advocate for that. Like just making sure you got exactly what you need on the defensive line, and so. But I do feel like what's currently on the roster now, what Miami's developed with some of those young guys, plus what they got returning with some of the older ones, and then what you got via the transfer portal and David Blay, like those are all guys that I think Miami fans should feel great about.
Yeah, and one thing that's encouraging too, a lot of the buzz this spring with the new system that Corey Hetherman is installing is it's clear there's a point of emphasis on just allowing the defensive line to fire off the ball, get upfield vertically, and try and be disruptive in the backfield. Last year there's a lot of stunting and twist games up front, and so I think with Hetherman with the new defensive approach, they wanted to get away from that and just kind of be more vertical, get upfield, get disruptive. So I think the players are enjoying that system, and we'll see if it improves the results. Linebacker, Gabby, I think we could be harsh, right? When we need to be
Yeah.
harsh.
Mhm.
This position group is probably my biggest concern for 2025 as it stands right now. Again, we've talked about receiver. I think Miami needs to go get receivers. I think they can do that. I think the portal can bring you receivers. I think that's a position group that you can find in the portal. Linebacker, I think, is tougher. I think it's, good linebackers generally just don't really hit the portal. Um, Miami has Wesley Basaint. We know what he is, right? He said in the beginning of spring he's working a little bit at Mike, working a little bit at Will. I think he's a solid player. Is he a difference maker? I think we can have a discussion there. And then, look, outside of Wesley Basaint, I just don't know if anyone right now for this season is ready to be, an impact contributor or, um, a reliable starter. Let's just put it there. I think
Yeah.
there's guys that flash, like I think certainly Bobby Pruitt can flash, but does he have the body type to really be an every down player in the sense of you like what he does in coverage? He plays fast, but he's kind of narrow. He's 210 pounds. I don't know, but can you depend on that when the other team's going to run the ball? Popo Aguirre and Jalen Alderman to me are like the opposite, the polar opposite of that. They're kind of like sawed off linebackers that, can come downhill and defend the run. Um, but they are probably going to have some issues in coverage. And maybe, look, maybe the answer is you kind of piece it all together and, uh, have those guys rotate. But anyways, your thoughts on linebacker? Because they also have young guys too, like Darius Hayes,
Yeah.
Kellen Wiley. I don't know if those guys are ready, but certainly they have the size you like at linebacker. But to me, this is a group that I hope Miami can really address in the portal with a proven linebacker that you can plug in and say, okay, that position group's taken care of now.
Yeah. I think for me, linebacker is definitely the spot that I'm most concerned about. And to me, it's pretty simple, right? Early in the season, who's coming to town? Jeremiah Love, who's probably going to get some buzz, kind of heading into the 2025 season as one of, if not the best running back, in college football. Like, what do you have on the roster right now that's helping you kind of stop Jeremiah Love? Because I think it's going to come down to
Right.
the linebackers are going to have to play a huge role in that, right? And to me, it's just right now, it's just not good enough if it comes to week one, huge game against the college football runner up. Who's going to help you win? Who at linebacker is going to help you win that game? Because you're going to have to stop Jeremiah Love. You're limit Jeremiah Love to win that game. And to me, it's just one of those positions similar to receiver where it's just like I like some of the young players, right? Like I love Bobby Pruitt, right? I think Bobby Pruitt's a really good player. I think he's still, again, to your point, he's just not big enough yet. He's just as far as just being a reliable, maybe like a three
Which
down
is
backer
fine.
type. I think, yeah, I
Like
think he
he
can
needs
be.
more
I think he
time.
can play for Miami, right? I think he could
Yeah.
be, we've talked about this, like more a situational type of guy, and he's extremely skilled. I think he's really reactionary. I think he's a really really good player. Like I think he's got it all. He's just got to add mass, right? Wesley Basaint's a veteran. I think we kind of know what we got in Wesley Basaint at this point of his career. Again, and I just think there's just too many question marks. Like I don't know if Kellen Wiley's going to be ready to go right away, and he looks like $1 million, but I think we need to continue to just see what it looks like for him long term. Darius Hayes, I think he's someone that just needs a ton of reps to kind of get it going, and maybe next year we can be having a conversation about a Darius Hayes and how far along he is and if he's ready to go. But I think for the 2025 season, I still think that Darius Hayes needs a little bit more time to bake. So for me, it's just one of those positions that you just like. Again, I think they feel good about Raul Popo Aguirre. He does all the right things, right? Like I think he's
Yeah.
someone that's extremely respected in the locker room. I think people like him. Again, I think he's a bright kid, but to me, I think this is one of the positions that you need to just be honest with yourselves about and just be like the linebacker room can get better. You can make this linebacker room better. To your point, also, David, I think this is also one of those rooms that's really hard to address. I think
Yeah. That's
especially
my
in the
concern.
spring window. Yeah, I think this is something they needed to address in the winter. There was obviously a lot of change and a lot of uncertainty there that made it harder to do that. I think they tried to an extent, but just weren't able to kind of just do it. Um, but I think you need to find a way to just continue to add to the linebacker room. Find someone that you can depend on. And again, maybe that's a big ask at this point. But for me personally, Corey Heatherman is the linebackers coach. So
Right.
I think maybe that's somewhere where you can give them the benefit of the doubt of just if you can get these guys to just really understand what they're doing. Who knows? Like, I don't know, maybe this
But
is something that,
also,
again,
as the
I could be wrong
DC,
about.
he can pound
Right.
the table and say, "Hey, we
Yeah.
got to go get a guy."
Yeah, and again, and that's I'm curious to find out how. Again, and I think we'll see. I think their actions will eventually tell us how they feel about this. But I am curious to see how they approach linebacker in this spring window because to me, we talked about this at cornerback last year, right? I think starting in the spring, we were both pounding the table like we need to get like this team needs to get better at cornerback. I think we said in the spring last year. No one's really talking about this, but I think running back too is a position that maybe Miami needs to address in the spring window or in the spring window. And again, I think they did one of those things and it paid off. They didn't do the other, and we saw the results with that. Like I think linebacker, and I think with what's at stake, with how balanced this roster is and what you got on it, I think there's just to me too much on the line to have any question marks. I think you got to find a way to add at least one more quality starter level linebacker to this roster
Right.
if you want to again if you want to have not have a chance. I don't want to say that. I'm not saying that Miami can't beat Notre Dame because of this or beat
No,
a Florida who's going to have a power running game too. I just think you need to solidify this spot, and I think it's important. To me, it's one of the most important things that Miami needs to address in the spring is finding a starter level linebacker.
I think this defense can be legitimately good if they go out and get
Yeah,
a linebacker like that. I think they will
yeah,
be improved already. Right now, as things
right.
stand, I think the defense is improved. I think it can be like legitimately good if you go out and get a linebacker. So, but again, that's easier said than done at that position
Yeah,
group. It's a hard position to fill. Um, Corner was a big point of emphasis in the
yeah,
portal window. Miami went out and added 4 guys in the portal. Uh, we've maintained in the instant reaction podcast, Xavier Lucas, complete stud. He's,
mhm,
probably one of our favorite players if if you're judging off what we say in the instant reaction podcast. To me, man, he's a total cornerback one. Um, that allows OJ Frederic to slide in and kind of be you know, that guy that's paired with him. I think Ethan O'Connor is also the Washington
mhm.
State transfer, also very good. Charles Brantley going to be a nice little pesky nickel. Um, coming into spring, you know, I think you and I both felt like on paper this position group looked like a potential strength of the team. Now that
Yeah.
we're halfway through spring football, would you still stand by that?
I would, yeah, just because to me, Xavier Lucas is the real deal. Like I think what we thought Miami was getting in him, Miami got just that. I think he's a true, cornerback one. He's just so long, he's so fast. Again, and I think he's just getting better, right? Like I think he's just kind of
Yeah,
scratching. I think he's just starting to scratch the surface. He wasn't the highest rated recruit. At one point he was like listed as he was a safety who kind of started to grow into a corner. Again, he ran as fast as he ever had, as a senior,
yeah. He's a
before
late
being a
bloomer.
summer. Right. I think he's
Yeah,
a typical late bloomer that's just on the ascend, right? Like I think we're only going to get better versions of Xavier Lucas. So I feel really good about corner because of that. Also, to your point, because we also know what we have in OJ Frederic, right? Because we saw it.
yeah.
We saw what he can do, and I think especially as a number two corner, like I think that's a
That's
really
good.
really top end 1-2. And again, I think that there's just so much excitement about guys like Charles Brantley and Ethan O'Connor. And I think what Emmanuel Carnley potentially gives you as a kind of a flexible like matchup type of corner. Like I think you have different flavors to line up to different things. If you have a big 6'4", 6'5" outside wide receiver, Xavier Lucas first of all could handle that because he's like 6'2". And then but you also got Carnley, who's a guy who can give you some of that as well. And then I just think you got depth, right? I mean,
There's Damari Brown too.
there's
I
Damari
personally,
Brown's in there.
I haven't heard much about him. Have you heard
Yeah,
anything about Damari? How he's looking?
I don't just because again I think he's just kind of nursing some
Right.
stuff, and I think I think we're still kind of feeling out what exactly it is that looks like. Again I think we're still getting a total a picture on what guys like Ethan O'Connor look like. But I still like the body types are there from a depth perspective. I don't
Right.
think you could ask for much more than what Miami has in this cornerback room. I think you feel really good about nickel with Charles Brantley there again, a guy who's going to just compete, right? Like I think what we've learned about Charles Brantley is that he's kind of a dog. Like he's gonna grind. He's gonna work hard. He's gonna kind of get in your face. He's not gonna back down from any of that stuff. So I think check off all the boxes for Charles Brantley. Is he the biggest guy? No. But we know what we're going to get from him also because there's also kind of proof of concept of what he's been as an outside corner. So I think he just gives you that flexibility too as a guy who can go and play inside, play on the outside. If they want to kick like Zechariah Poyser down to the nickel, I think Charles Brantley can play on the outside, maybe cover some of those smaller, faster guys. Like I think Charles Brantley is a nice chess piece that they have on
Mhm.
in the secondary too that they can move around and do a couple different things with. Um,
They have
Plus the other
answers
guys. Yeah,
at
to me,
corner.
that's what that's
Yeah.
my that's very that's just a condensed way of saying what I'm saying. Like I just love all the different flavors that they have because it feels like they have again answers to any sort of picture that they could get that an offense can kind of throw at them. So I do like what this cornerback room is. Again, they got physical guys too. Like Damari Brown can just be a physical big stout corner too. Like he's a big dude. OJ Frederic is getting big. Like he looks like he's looking like he's thick right now. Xavier Lucas again, he's kind of long but he's got some mass to him too. Like I just really like what this cornerback room looks like right now.
Yeah. And I think this group has the potential to be a good man coverage group. And
Yeah,
that's what every college program kind of aspires to have. They're hard to find. They're hard, man cover corners are rare. But I think Miami's going to be able to play effective man coverage this year, and that allows your front seven to just, do whatever they want to do. So, uh, it's going to be better. The secondary is going to be better. It starts with the cornerback group. Safety, you touched on him a little bit, but Zach Poyser, the Jacksonville State safety transfer, produced, looked really good at the group of five level, making the jump now to the power four level. Uh, first thing when you look at him, he looks like a power four level player. So the body
yeah,
type, that's always kind of the first thing you got to look for with those guys making that jump. But he's a guy that looks the part. I'm also getting good feedback on how he's playing as well. What do you think about Poiser from what you understand?
yeah. Again, I think he gives you some versatility too. Like I think he's someone that again he's someone that can play nickel. I think he's someone that you can kind of have back there at safety. I think he's a really good athlete. He moves around super well. And again, I think people feel good about him as far as just being a part or a difference maker, in the secondary, a guy who again I think is gonna just make a lot of plays. He's willing to be physical and kind of be a part of the run game too. So I feel really good about Zach Poyser. Again, we haven't really kind of seen it all in full pads, which I think there's a different layer to like kind of evaluation once it all comes on. But I think again, he looks the part, and athletically, I think he kind of checks off all those boxes as far like Miami. I think he's a better athlete than I think the guys that they had a year ago. Whether it be Mish Powell or Jaden Harris. Like I think you upgraded from that standpoint too. To me, the biggest question at safety is just who's going to play alongside of him. And
Right.
again, there's some veteran guys in there. Markeith Williams, who look, I think he's having a good spring. I think he has ball skills. He can get his hands on passes and all of those things. But similar to a guy, like a Bobby Pruitt, I just think the body type,
It's
his like
tough.
physically, I think that there's just it's I think it's difficult to ask him to be a three down guy or something other than maybe a situational guy where he can just has to kind of just make a play on the ball or something like that. I think he could be a part of the rotation. I think I just don't know how reliable Markeith Williams is going to be able to be, on a down to down basis. So for me, it's just who's going to play alongside Zechariah
Right.
Poyser, and I think that's a big question mark too, as far as just like, is there someone on this roster that can do it? Is it a guy like Damari Brown? We talk about
Right.
him and what he could be. Is he someone that can kind of kick back to safety and help back there? Is Saquon Patterson going to kind of take that next step? Dylan Day is a guy that's emerging, and he's been making plays by all
He's
accounts. A guy
fast.
that yeah, he's a good athlete again, but he's just kind of raw. We saw what he did on
Right.
special teams, and I think that's an encouraging sign of what he can do. Again, just regularly. But I think that's just a big question mark from a production standpoint, where we haven't just seen him do it, and that doesn't mean he can't. But again, he's just a young guy who we're just still unsure about because we haven't seen the product yet, or just we haven't seen him actually produce out there. But is Dylan Day kind of like the dark horse here to maybe be the second safety or just be a part of the rotation? Like to me, there's just still question marks about that second safety spot. And I'm curious if
Yeah.
that's somewhere, if that's a position that they go address in the portal, or if there's something in house, like on the roster right now, that will help them, kind of solve that issue.
Yeah, I think, look, we're not talking about some guys in depth because some guys are out for the spring, right? So, like, a guy like Zaquan Patterson would be in the mix. He's kind of limited right now in the spring because he's, recovering from whatever he's recovering from. I also wonder, too, just Jadis Richard, if he makes a full recovery by the start of fall camp, I wonder what he would look like working
Yeah.
there at safety as
He
well.
started his career at safety, right? At Vandy.
Yeah.
I think he
Yeah.
started he started back there. Like I think that's definitely on the table too.
Right. So, you know, I wouldn't be against them addressing that in the portal, but I think there's other positions I would prefer them to address
Right.
first. Because I do think they can find an option on the roster now. You might have to convince a guy to go from corner to safety. It would be best for that player's career probably to go from corner to safety. Um, but yeah, I think the potential answer is on the roster if they're able to make that move. All right, let's go over to well, let's wrap things up here, Gabby. I think if we're comparing year over year springs, it's interesting, right? Because it's very hard to it's more difficult to judge this team than last year's team at this
Yeah.
point,
Right.
simply because quarterbacks, the starting quarterback is not out there. And this time last year, the starting quarterback was a complete stud. He was a stud from day one. The offense clicked from day one, which is extremely rare in the spring. Typically, the cliche is true. Like the defense is almost always ahead in the spring. That was not the case last year. And that showed you what was coming in the fall. It was
Right.
a special offense. It was different. Cam Ward's different, right? Going to be the number one pick. This spring's kind of more your traditional college football spring where there's good competition. Do you really know what you got? I think in some spots you do. In some spots there's question marks. And it's going to be interesting to see like how Miami self-evaluates from this spring and what moves
Right.
they go. But overall, I do think like if we're going top, however you want to rank them, top 35 players on the team, I do feel better about this team, I think, than last year's team, just with the progression of the program and the
Yeah.
recruiting stacking and where things are at on both sides of the ball.
I agree. I think that this is just a more balanced roster year
Yes.
over year. Like I think that there is a good amount of real, high end defensive talent that we feel good about.
Yes.
Again, some questions just because we haven't seen it on offense, but I think we like, you at the end of the day, we know what Carson Beck is. We haven't
Right.
seen Carson Beck with this group, but we know what Carson Beck is. And then you feel good about, a lot of the offensive personnel too, especially on the line of scrimmage and in the running back. So you're going to have you got a strong running game in your back pocket. It's more of a question of how does the passing game kind of all come together with a veteran quarterback who's won and played in a ton of big games. So I think you just feel like that's eventually just gonna kind of come together with the young talent coming up again with what they did on defense. Again, I think that I think this is really since Mario Cristobal's been here. I think this is the most balanced roster. Now, again, there's no Cam Ward, and last year's offense was
It's going to look
special.
different. It's going
Right,
to
it's
look
going to look
different.
different, but I think that like if we're comparing like just the fullness of this picture, like I do think that this is top to bottom, one of the I think to this point probably the best roster overall that we've
Yeah.
had to this point. Maybe not the best offense. This is not going to be the number one offense in the country. They're not going to do what this last team did on offense, but I think we're also going to see a significant improvement defensively that makes just Miami just a well-rounded, well-balanced team, and that's going to make them I think just really, really good to beat, on a weekly basis or hard to beat on a weekly basis as you kind of, again, go through and navigate an ACC schedule.
I think it's possible for Miami to be top 25 offense and top 25 defense. If you do that, now look, are they going to be closer to 25 than one in both those categories? Probably. But if you do that, you should be in Charlotte at the end of the year. So,
Yeah.
and they have things to address. Don't get us wrong. We're kind of assuming they will address some of those issues that are showing in the spring. And if they do, I feel good about where this roster's at. All right, let's go to recruiting real quick because that's a huge part of spring football as well. The
Yeah.
calendar keeps just getting sped up. And so March recruiting is a busy, busy time. And let's start with a recent commitment over the weekend. This guy's been on Miami's radar for a while. Javian Mallory out of West Boca. He's a composite four-star running back. He's the sixth commitment for Miami in this 2026 cycle. 5'11", 200. He's been productive here these last 2 years at West Boca in 18 games. So 18 games over his last two seasons. He's run for 2,091 yards, 28 touchdowns, averaging 10 yards a carry. What does this commitment mean for Miami's class, Gabby?
Yeah, I think it's a big commitment, right? Like, I think this is Miami talks about keeping South Florida's best players home, and I think JV Mallory, like like you're saying, David, this is someone that they identified a while back, and that they've been recruiting for quite some time now, and we're able to kind of add him to the class. And look, there's a guy that had offered from Clemson, Michigan was on him, Florida State, Notre Dame, like a lot of schools that again kind of run that similar style. I think he's probably more of a power back.
Yeah.
I think he's going to end up, I think when it's all said and done, he's going to be a guy that's probably in that 210, 215 pound range. Like I think he has the body type to just get bigger. So I
Hmm.
think he's, maybe not Mark Fletcher, but I think he's Mark, if you're comparing him to someone on the roster, I think he's Mark Fletcher ish as far as just being, I think, one of those bigger type of guys. And again, he's been productive. He did get banged up, as a junior, but he's a guy who's been playing varsity football since he was in the eighth grade, and he's been highly productive in all of those years. Had a breakout sophomore season where he ran for like over 1,500 yards. So again, I think Javier Mallory is kind of just like a proven commodity here in South Florida. Plays against quality teams. Again, West Boca just won their first ever state title. That's not a school that traditionally wins. So I think it just says a lot about the job that they're doing over there. But also, again, I think Javian Mallory is and really the feedback I got is I'm reading it here is just kind of cut from the same cloth as Mark Fletcher and Jordan Lyle is like a South Florida power back. So again, I think Miami's just getting another piece of what they kind of have in the room and trying to just kind of keep that train going.
Yeah, to me, and when I say this, it might be taken as a slight. I really don't mean that as a slight, but to me, he's like a really solid complementary running back. And to navigate a season, you need a running back room that can depend on, what, four players. And to me, he's a guy that can be depended upon in that way. You look at him, his body type isn't like the most impressive. He isn't like the fastest player, but he does run hard. He runs with power, contact balance. He understands one of the most impressive things about him when you watch his tape. He understands what tracks need to be take to maximize the yardage on a, carry, whatever the defense shows him. So I do think there's a big time care factor there, like you're alluding to, Gabby, and I think he can improve on some of the physicality things like his body type and speed in a college program. So he kind of reminds me, I don't know, this might be a reach, I don't know, but like if I'm comparing him to a former Hurricane, he kind of reminds me of like a poor man's Mike James in that he's just good, solid, all around back with the right mentality. You can put the ball in his hand and trust him to go get you 4 yards, 5 yards. Particularly, he's a good red zone back, tough runner down there. To me, he's kind of like a Mike James-ish type of running back. He was a good complementary back to Duke Johnson. And look, Mike James went on to have a little bit of an NFL career too. So
Right.
he was a talented guy in his own right, which, if Mallory is being compared to an NFL guy, that's a compliment in my opinion. So what is this, before we move on, what does this mean for like the position recruiting of the running back
Yeah.
room?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting, and I think that's one. I think to me that's one of the more interesting dynamics of the rest of this 2026 cycle, just because there's so many names on the board, right? You got Derek Cooper, of course, at Shaman Vadana. I still view him as the prize for Miami this cycle, and I think Miami. Look, I do think Miami's in a really good position there to eventually
Right.
land Derek Cooper. Like I think that that's absolutely on the table. But they're also going through some national options, right? Over the weekend they brought in Tredarian Ball, an Oregon commit, and I do think Miami is the school pushing Oregon the most there. Miami is going to kind of continue to push that situation. Go see him in the spring during that evaluation. Continue to try to take next steps towards locking in a summer official visit and continue to work on Ball. Throughout these next few months until this situation is kind of settled. And then, there's a guy in Henry Allinger out of Columbus, Ohio, who I believe is going to be at practice on Thursday, who Miami is really excited about too. Again, another kind of 6'1", over 200 pounder. Haven't really seen him in person, but internally, viewed as a top running back option for them. So I think it's interesting there. They're going to get Javian Osborne, who's another top 247 running back out of Texas, who has plenty of national options, but they're working on that situation as well to go along with guys like Jay Lamar and Amari Latimer, a bunch of others that are kind of a part of the running back picture here as well. So I think that there's a lot of interesting kind of dynamics here, but I think at the end of the day, Miami
Cooper.
wants Derek Cooper. And I personally feel at this point, I think Miami again is in just a really good position to potentially get that done. Still some work to do, but the more and more I kind of dig into this, the more and more I kind of feel like it'll ultimately be a JV Mallory, Derek Cooper running back class. But again, I think that there's still work that needs to be done.
All right. And I want to get out of here on this note. I'm just going to give you the floor to kind of ramble, Gabby, because again, like spring football is a vitally important time for recruiting in this, current cycle. Just the way the calendar sets up. A lot of guys are just rolling through, right,
Yeah,
campus, and so it can be there's a lot of names to follow and know, and
right.
so I want you to kind of just like pare it down. Who are some of the guys that you feel like? Because again, Miami, these are opportunities for Miami to get eyes on guys in terms of like body types, what guys look like, interact with them. Are their personalities going to fit the locker room? And so it's an opportunity for Miami just from a visit um, to either like a guy more or feel like a relationship's really building in a nice way
Yeah.
for the summer, which is when kind of recruitment's closed nowadays. Who do you feel like these first 2 weeks or first 7 practices midway through spring football for Miami? Who's Miami kind of stock up for, trending up for in a good place? Who's come down to UM for this spring?
Yeah, I definitely a number of guys, and I just wrote about this on the site. So if you want to head over to insideview.com, there's definitely I kind of broke this down. I'll give a few names from that. I want to start with 5-star offensive lineman Jackson Cantwell. I think
Yeah,
that Miami is in a really good position there. He spent a few days down in South Florida. He met with the president of the university. That's not something that just typically happens.
right,
We've talked here about his representation, Drew Rosenhaus of Rosenhaus Sports, a Miami alum. He was at practice with Jackson Cantwell and his family. Drew himself, who of course has a high number of NFL, clientele, big
right.
names out there, and has taken the time with Jackson Cantwell. I think Miami, again, with their offensive line centric kind of situation, how that relationship has just kind of continued to develop. We talk about the recruiting and the need, David. I think Jackson Cantwell in Miami is a situation I think that's continuing to take really important next steps as he enters the next phase in his recruitment. So I think Miami is definitely a stock up school with Jackson Cantwell. A couple other guys that I'll kind of bring to the table: Samari and Wingo, the wide receiver out of St. Augustine. As we know, David, that's Gator country. I
Yep.
think Florida has a heavy pool in just again that's kind of right in his backyard. Um, so I think Florida is probably the school that Miami is kind of chasing. But Samari and Wingo originally planned to be in Miami for just a couple days. I think it was on his spring break. Got in Tuesday afternoon. Was going to leave Thursday after practice. Extends that stay into Sunday. So ends up just kind of spending a lot more time with Miami than anticipated. Cancels his Florida State visit that he was supposed to go on that Saturday. I do think Miami and Florida are maybe two of the schools that are kind of at the top of that recruitment right now. And I think Miami's definitely kind of closed that gap on a regional school that typically gets those types of kids. So I think Samarian Wingo is definitely a
He's a good
player that,
player.
yeah, I think he's definitely one to watch. John Tavius Wyman, a Georgia commit out of Jonesboro, which is basically like, I think it's just right outside of Atlanta. So an area, but he's someone Miami's been recruiting a lot, and he comes down and visits with Zach Etheridge, Will Harris, the secondary guys. Miami was recruiting them before he even got here. But I think, having Zach Etheridge on board helps Miami kind of take some of those important next steps. So he visited, I believe, not this week. That I think it was the week before, the first week they came back from spring break, and he's coming back this coming weekend for Miami's pool party that they're having for recruits on Saturday. So just 2 visits in a really short span. I think Miami's kind of, again, arrows kind of pointing up for Miami in the Jontavius Wyman recruitment. Two more I'll bring to the table, David. Two tight ends. Ian Premer, number 3 tight end out of Kansas, a kid who's being very methodical in his recruiting process, and he's probably one of the more impressive flex tight end options. That also kind of gives you something at the line of scrimmage. Miami's really values that after just having Elijah Arroyo, who definitely gives you a bit of both those things, more on the pass catching side. I think Ian Premer is in a similar mold. I think he was in a 6'3", 230 pound range, or 6'4", 230 pound range. I think Miami definitely moved the needle on his visit. A guy that's also really considering Michigan, Notre Dame, a couple of his local schools. He's from Kansas, Kansas State, Kansas, Iowa State, who have all been on him for a long time. But I think Miami moved the needle there. And then Luke Sorensen, a tight end from California, who Miami sky high on, came in to visit last weekend to see Miami really for the first time as a kind of prominent recruit on the radar. And I think Miami really helped themselves there. I think they came into the visit as either the front runner or a front runner, along with like a small pocket of schools, maybe Nebraska and Penn State. But I think Miami is in a really good position for Luke Sorensen. Miami really likes him. Again, just really young, still just 16 years old. Won't enroll. I mean, he'll be 17 for multiple months once he enrolls in college. And big kid, almost just a shade over 6'3", pushing 250 pounds. Wears a size 17 shoe, so his dad's like 6'6", so he still has plenty of developmental upside, but already kind of has the mass necessary to again just be kind of an inline line of scrimmage guy who also gives you some of that pass catching potential too. So I think that's a group. There's a lot more. Joel Irvin, a former Louisville commit who Miami had on campus. I think that there's some real momentum with Miami and Joel Irvin, an offensive lineman out of Fort Myers, down in your neck of the woods, David, who definitely has a size at 6'6.5", 330 pounds. Internally, and I think I've said this before, just internally reminds people of Jalen Rivers when he was a high school recruit, and just what he gives you from a position versatility standpoint and just kind of a steadiness. So I think that that's a good group of guys to focus on. Again, there are others, and would encourage you to check out Inside the U. Just drop like 10 names or so of guys who I feel the arrow's pointing up for when it comes to Miami here at the midway point of the spring.
I got two questions for you. Maybe I'm being like prisoner of the moment, but it does feel like this spring Miami's doing its best job of the Cristobal era of just getting guys on campus from all
Yeah,
over the country to come visit this spring. Is that fair to say, you think?
I do, and I think they've always done a good job of getting some
Yeah,
top guys. But I think what to me has been most
the
fascinating is
depth.
just it's the depth and just how consistent. It's just
Yeah,
constantly like random Tuesdays. You got 3 or 4 or 5 Power Five guy or Power Four guys, like major Power Four guys, and so it's just constant. It's like the amount of guys who are getting down here is to me, I haven't seen anything quite like this, and I think coming into the 2026 cycle, we talked about this, right? Because we talked
yeah,
about how this is maybe the first cycle that Miami's truly recruiting off of a 10-win season. We
right.
keep talking about the clock getting expedited, the cycles shortening because of the summer months, and with all this stuff coming up. Like I do think that this is Miami's first time that they're actually recruiting, off of some like on-field
Yeah.
success, and I
And
think
it's
that
year
that
four.
just
They're
right,
caught up,
yeah,
you know?
definitely. I think it's all of that. I think the personnel department is, as structured as it's ever been, as far as just having a lot of different people doing a lot of different things. It's a big group, a lot of eyes on this thing. I think they do a good job both locally of just having guys here around to take care of the South Florida area, and then also eyes nationally where they're able to kind of just get in on some of these guys early. And then look, I think Miami is a national brand. Like I still think Miami's a national
Yeah.
brand. So Miami winning, I think, helps just kind of continue to generate eyes towards coming down and playing in South Florida. And David, I mean, it's been incredible down here. Like
Yeah,
I
Miami and
think
spring break is, an
yeah,
easy
I
sell.
mean, people are coming down here, and these top recruits are loving it because
Right.
we're a lot of the places they're coming from. It's not
Yeah.
perfectly sunny outside at a very nice temperature. And I think there's a lot of boxes that Miami checks. They just hadn't really checked off like the football part as far as just being a program that's able to win. And I think now that they're doing that, I think it just makes them more of an attractive option, which is why, David, it's gonna we've talked about it's going to be harder for non-SEC Big Ten schools to kind of just be at the top of these recruiting rankings. But I think Miami's going to be able to crack back into the top 10, maybe top 7 ish, just because with what they have going on. Again, having their being buttoned up from an NIL standpoint with Kane's connection and everything else they got going on, plus the on-field results, and then plus just being in
The
Miami and being,
effort. Yeah.
yeah, the effort, and then just what this place has to offer. I think that there's a lot of reasons to believe that Miami's recruiting is just going to kind of continue to take those next steps and continue to kind of level up, where you're going to see more of the depth, right? We've seen some of the top end talent, but I think just like the depth of these classes are also going to get better. So yeah, I think that there's a lot to be excited about from a recruiting standpoint, and this spring has been really really busy. It's been really
Yeah.
active, and for all good things, that's the way that we want it down here.
Last thing. So, um, you know, again, the summer is a big time for just landing guys, right? Official visits happen in June, guys commit in July, uh, in a general sense. And so I'm curious, like, as things stand here in March, and as you kind of like look at how Miami's recruiting certain position groups, and look, part of this might be because there's new position coaches that Miami
Yeah,
welcome in too this offseason. I'm curious, like, is there a position group that you look at right now and you're like, man, it's a little murky to me right now, like how Miami's going to fill out this specific position group in this cycle?
yeah, I think two for me. I think linebackers one, just because, yeah, I think between the changes and then I just think nationally it's not really viewed as a great linebacker class or just linebacker year. You got Jordan Campbell on board, which I think is a huge win. And
Yeah.
then if you want to get in on some of these top end guys, like the guys that are kind of ready to go, it's the Tyler Atkinson, it's Xavier Griffin out of Georgia too. It's the Tiona Ely, who's now playing in Hawaii. You got guys like that where it's just like those are tough. Those are going to be tough recruitments to win. So I think linebacker is going to be interesting for sure. They just had CJ Sana in from again a guy. I think he's a guy from Ohio. There's someone somewhere. He's kind of transitioning to linebackers. Played linebacker and running back. I think he's an interesting one, but I think that that's just murky from like just a big picture standpoint. You got Jermichael Garrett, who's in Auburn, Alabama, committed to Auburn. I think Miami feels like they're in the game there, but you never really know with a kid that's just so kind of tied in there. But I do think he's exploring Miami as an option. I think that that's legitimate. But I think linebacker is tough, and then I think the edge spots again. I think it's just one of those things. Just kind of, I think it's just kind of considered a down year at edge. You got a Shari Charles over in Venice, and then it's just a lot of out of state guys. And just even then, I think the pool is maybe not as deep as it has been in some past years. So yeah, I think those two are just kind of just like I'm waiting to kind of see what happens there. I think there will always be, corners. I think they're doing a good job in the secondary. I think at wide receiver,
Is
they're on the
there a
right
position
track.
group you're excited about more than the others?
I think wide receiver. I'm pretty excited about wide receiver just because I kind of like what they're doing, where they're just kind of going after a lot of like they're basically like 6 foot 6'2" plus guys who are in that 185 plus pound range. Like I think it's a lot of just bigger body types that they're kind of looking for. And we've always talked about how like Miami's never really stockpiled those types. And I do think Miami's like intentionally looking to get bigger at receiver. So I am kind of curious to see what that ultimately looks like. There's some exciting options to me too, like Calvin Russell, right down
Yeah.
the road. Again, Samari and Wingo. You got a couple guys that they're kind of chasing that'll be in this weekend. You got the Chris Henry Jr. who's visiting this weekend. I don't think Miami's going to get him, but just like here for all of that, Zion Robinson, another top 100 guy out of Texas, visiting this weekend. Just guys, I don't know. I think I'm kind of excited to see how the wide receiver room kind of ends up playing out because I think that there's just opportunity there. Really like the tight
O
end board.
line
I think
seems
it's
strong
really
too,
O line's
honestly.
going to be super
But
fun too, and also because there's just so many in-state options like
yeah,
offensive line. There's a lot. To me, that's just a big puzzle. It's just like which one of these guys are you gonna end up getting and how kind of fitting it together. But I think there's a number of combinations of that are exciting. Again, are you gonna be able to reel in Jackson Cantwell? Like, can you get him? I think that that's on the table. Ben Cogden, I think, is someone that I think is just going to kind of continue to be
yeah.
stock up. You got Kenye Pepe at IMG. You got the Johnny Jones, and then you got all of the kind of like the interior guys of the Micah Smiths and the Joel Irvins, Duron Parks. You even got another developmental tackle in Chancellor Campbell. A lot of those guys are going to be here this week, and then plus the rest of the IMG guys, the Brett Kulajay, Janari Carr. Again, I
Yeah,
think
it's a
there's just
stacked
it's
year
yeah,
in the
Ryan
state.
Moret down in
Yeah,
At Southridge. Like there are options on the
yeah.
offensive line, and they're quality options. Again, there's a number of combinations that like I feel good about what Miami's going to do on the offensive line this cycle, just because I think there are a lot of like kind of talented players who kind of fit the mold. And so, yeah, again, I think that there's a lot of positions where I'm just like I am curious to see what it looks like. I think defensive tackle too. I think this needs to be a good defensive tackle class too. Like I think needs to be a year where they kind of hit on some of those interior defensive linemen, and I think that there's opportunity there as well.
All right, go check out InsideView.com. Gabby's all over it from a recruiting standpoint. As always, he has VIP content up today that you guys will enjoy reading. So support us too. If you want to sign up, that always helps. InsideView.com. Um, go support us in that way. Appreciate us, everyone, for listening. Again, check us out on YouTube at the Inside the U channel. Go subscribe over there. And until next time, take care.